Hi guys, I thought I'd make a little video about the UK and Brexit, aka the UK leaving the EU. I wanted to make this video because I went up to see my mate Tish in Croydon last weekend, and it kind of inspired me to use video as a way to get my points across, especially as I kind of find myself having to respond to the same fucking ridiculous questions over and over again. So I thought it would be a really good idea to create this video, you know, for posterity, and also so that, you know, next time these fucking ridiculous questions come up again, I can just, you know, send some people a link so I don't have to actually bother engaging, because I mean it is 2016 after all. Do you know what, I'm actually just going to minimize this because I find it really disconcerting watching myself, and also I'm really sorry about the quality of this video. I know the sound is probably shit. Ain't nothing I can do about that. So anyway, let's talk about the UK leaving the EU, and let's just cut the bullshit, get straight to it, and let's talk about immigration, because you have to get real. At the end of the day, people can cloak up wanting to leave the EU in all sorts of different ways. They can talk about sovereignty. They can talk about how, you know, we need to have more control over our legislation, and we need to be able to govern ourselves. We don't want to be ruled from Brussels or Strasbourg, and all of this kind of shit. And some people are actually extremely informed, and they properly looked into this, and they have some kind of highly intricate examples and reasons as to why they think this is important. But for the everyday person, actually, a lot of the time what it comes down to is immigration. And if you are watching this and you're not one of these people who has an issue with EU immigration, but you still would vote and will vote to leave the EU, then fine, this doesn't apply to you. But I'm talking about the people for whom, either secretly or explicitly, immigration from the EU is a problem. Okay, we do need to get real, and we have to realise that we can't actually dismiss all fears and concerns about mass immigration from the EU having had an impact on depressing wages, making life generally more difficult for working class British people, okay? Because when you've got situations like I saw the other day in a documentary about EU immigration to Sheffield, when you've got situations where you have a guy who runs a car wash who says that he would rather employ immigrants from the EU rather than British people, because the immigrants from the EU don't complain, and they're hard working and they do the jobs that the British people don't want to do, and then he adds quite freely that he pays them £30 a day. You have to understand what's going on here. Immigrants from the EU are coming to the UK to work for a restricted period of time. They want to come to the UK and work for 1, 2, 3 years. They don't mind sharing houses and working for low wages because they have an end goal in sight, and you can't deplore them for that, because it's something I do. It's something we'd all do if we're given an opportunity to go and work for much better wages than we'd get at home, and we know that all we have to do is, you know, sit tight and get through it for a limited period of time. Of course you do it. The problem is then when you try and apply that to British people for whom there is no end in sight, as in if you accept work for £30 a day, which just the mind boggles, that's not a means to an end. That is it. You're working for £30 a day and you somehow got to survive on that. That's not on. I don't think any person, whether they're British or non-British, should have to work in those conditions. And I don't think it's either the fault of the British workers or the EU workers who come over here and take on that work. I think it's the fault of this fucking Tory government who put human lives on the line, all in a bid to satisfy companies and greed. The fact is that it's so easy to turn around and say, which is one of the main arguments that we hear over and over again, we can't control our borders. We've got a problem with EU immigration and we can't control our borders. I just want to remind everyone of what happened in 2004. In 2004, she says, taking her cardigan off dramatically. In 2004, the accession countries joined the EU, and among the accession countries, I think there was Malta and Cyprus and all those cute EU countries, and then there were the EU accession countries like Poland, Slovakia, Hungary. Sorry, I've had a few beers. And when those new EU accession states joined the EU, pretty much every single existing EU member put restrictions on immigration from the new accession countries. So you had countries like France, which said, in terms of freedom of movement, we're going to put a 5-year ban on it. Okay, so citizens of the new accession countries will have to wait 5 years before they're allowed to come and work in France. Loads of different countries had different kind of restrictions that they wanted to apply. A lot of them wanted to restrict workers from coming in for 2 years. Some of them wanted reciprocal freedom of movement. Germany had bilateral quotas, so it was highly restricted, and that was for the full 7 years. Only 3 countries decided that they would have a completely open door, unrestricted policy, and yeah, you guessed it, that was Ireland, fair dues, Sweden, and the UK. So what does that mean? That means that when people are sitting around talking about how the EU doesn't allow us to control our borders, the EU gives us absolutely no control over freedom of movement, no. The UK back in 2004, and that was New Labour, by the way, so let's not, before we get swept up in this whole Tory Britain, which, by the way, I hate Tory Britain, but before we get swept along in that, let's just remember that this is New Labour we're talking about. Back in 2004, they decided they were going to have a completely fucking free, open door policy, which is fine. But now they have the gall to turn around and say that the EU restricts to what extent we control our borders. It's absolute bullshit. So if anyone here who is watching this feels strongly about this argument that the EU prevents us from having any control whatsoever over our country, think again. New Labour allowed the free door to swing open. The Tories, of course, would have done it 10 times harder if that were actually possible. And all because in this country we have a history of putting profits and capitalism before the people. It's just a fucking disgrace, really. If you really think that without the EU we'll be living in some kind of paradise where workers are paid a better wage and you're working less hours and you're suddenly magically able to afford a house and suddenly there are rent caps, then you're seriously deluded. The only thing that will happen if this country leaves the EU is Britain will be able to get rid of its EU migrants, basically because now so many of the immigration spots are taken up by EU migrants. I think it's 40% of the total income to the UK is made up of EU migrants. But that's not going to stop the Tory party from allowing unbridled immigration into this country if this is a concern of yours. They'll just extend that to the whole rest of the world because they'll have a whole 48% chunk that are no longer compulsory to be taken in. In addition to that, I think you can expect to see wages plummet even further. I think you can expect our pensions to completely disappear, even though we all already expect that. And it's just like, I just don't understand what world you have to be living in to think that somehow the EU is this big, massive, oppressive barrier that stands between the UK and total frolicking in the meadows of socialism. That's not going to happen. This country is going to the pits, and that is because of our own internal problems and a kind of fucked up lethargic system based on the greed of an upper class overlord political mindset. Sorry, that sentence didn't necessarily make sense, but Yeah.